Before we begin, let's make one thing clear. Attachment is not bad. In fact, attachment is a normal part of being human. We are wired for connection. We want to belong. We want to feel safe. We want to know that someone is there for us. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem begins when attachment starts pretending to be love. Over the years, I've had the privilege of speaking with many people about their relationships. Some were dating, some were married, some were recovering from heartbreak. And although every story was different, a surprising pattern kept appearing. People would tell me how much they loved someone. Then, as we talked, another picture would begin to emerge. What they feared most wasn't losing the relationship. It was losing the feeling the relationship gave them. The comfort, the security, the validation, the certainty that someone wanted them. I remember one conversation in particular. A young man came to me after a difficult breakup. He was devastated. For months, he couldn't move on. Every conversation led back to his ex. Every memory led back to the relationship. At one point, I asked him a simple question. If she called you today and said she wanted to come back, would you want the relationship back because of who she is, or because of how painful it feels to be without her? He became very quiet. And honestly, most people become quiet when they hear a question like that, because it forces us to look deeper. Sometimes what we miss is not the person. Sometimes we miss the certainty they provided. Sometimes we miss the role they played in our lives. Sometimes we miss the version of ourselves we were when they were around, and that realization can be uncomfortable. Psychologist John Bowlby, whose work helped shape attachment theory, believed that human beings naturally form emotional bonds that create feelings of safety and security. Those bonds are important. They help us survive. They help us connect. They help us build meaningful relationships. But attachment and love are not identical. Attachment asks, will you stay? Love asks, how can we grow? Attachment fears losing. Love values becoming. Attachment often focuses on what we receive. Love focuses on what we give. Now don't misunderstand me. Healthy relationships contain both. Love without attachment can become distant. Attachment without love can become controlling. The goal is balance, and that's where many people struggle, because attachment often feels more intense. It feels urgent. It feels emotional. It feels dramatic. Love is often quieter, steadier, less exciting perhaps, but far more durable. Think about the last time you were worried about losing someone. Did you find yourself constantly checking your phone, replaying conversations, analyzing every text message, looking for hidden meanings in simple words? If you're smiling right now, you're not alone. Most of us have done it. Some of us have done it more than we'd like to admit. The funny thing is that while we're busy analyzing every message, the other person may simply be taking a nap, or sitting in traffic, or trying to decide what to eat for dinner. Meanwhile, we've already imagined 3 different disasters. Human beings can be remarkably creative when anxiety gets involved. And anxiety is often one of the biggest clues that attachment has entered the conversation, because attachment fears uncertainty. Love can tolerate it. Attachment demands reassurance. Love develops trust. Attachment clings. Love connects. That distinction may sound small, but it changes everything. And in the next part of this discussion, we're going to explore one of the clearest ways to tell whether what you're feeling is primarily love or attachment. Because once you understand that difference, you begin seeing relationships in an entirely new way. One of the most powerful questions I've ever asked someone about a relationship sounds almost too simple. In fact, the first time I heard it, I underestimated it myself. But over the years, I've discovered that this single question has a way of revealing things people have been avoiding for months, sometimes years. The question is this: if this person could no longer give you what you want, would you still want what is best for them? Take a moment and really think about that. Not the answer that sounds good, not the answer you're supposed to give, your honest answer. I've asked different versions of this question many times, and the reactions are often fascinating. Some people answer immediately. Others become very quiet. And sometimes The silence says more than the words. I remember speaking with a woman who had recently gone through a painful breakup. She described her former partner as the love of her life. She talked about him constantly, thought about him every day, checked his social media more times than she cared to admit. And if we're being honest, many of us have probably done the same thing at some point. At one stage of the conversation, I asked her a question. If he met someone else tomorrow and genuinely became happy, would part of you be happy for him? The room became very quiet, because suddenly we were no longer talking about what she wanted. We were talking about what she felt. Eventually, she looked down and said, I don't know. And honestly, that was one of the healthiest answers she could have given, because self-awareness rarely begins with certainty. It begins with honesty. The truth is that attachment often struggles when another person's happiness no longer includes us. Love struggles too. Let's not pretend otherwise. Love hurts. Love grieves. Love feels lost deeply. But love is still capable of wanting good things for another person, even when the outcome isn't what we hoped for. That distinction is important, because many people spend years trying to answer a question they've never properly asked. Do I love this person, or do I need this person? And those are not the same thing. Years ago, relationship expert Esther Perel made an observation that I found incredibly insightful. She suggested that many people are not simply looking for love. They're looking for security, for certainty, for reassurance, for a place where they feel emotionally safe, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. The challenge begins when security slowly becomes dependency, when another person's presence becomes responsible for our emotional stability. I've seen this happen more times than I can count. Someone starts dating. The relationship feels wonderful. Life feels exciting. The future feels bright. Then slowly, without realizing it, their entire emotional world begins revolving around one person. Their mood depends on the relationship. Their confidence depends on the relationship. Their peace of mind depends on the relationship. Their self-worth depends on the relationship. And that's a heavy burden for any relationship to carry, because no human being was designed to become another person's entire emotional foundation. Sooner or later, the pressure begins to show. The relationship becomes less about connection and more about emotional survival. One person becomes afraid of losing the relationship. The other person feels responsible for constantly maintaining it. And eventually, both people become exhausted. Not because they don't care, but because attachment has quietly taken control. I sometimes explain it this way. There is a difference between needing someone and choosing someone. Needing someone says, I cannot be okay without you. Choosing someone says, my life is better with you. One comes from fear. The other comes from freedom. One creates pressure. The other creates partnership. And perhaps that is one of the clearest signs of mature love. Not possession, not dependency, not control. Choice. Daily choice. Continual choice. The decision to love someone not because you need them to complete you, but because you genuinely value who they are. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever stayed in a relationship longer than you should have? Not because you were happy, but because you were afraid of what life might look like without that person. Think about that carefully, because the answer may reveal more than you expect. And if you're finding value in this conversation, consider subscribing. Here at the Wisdom Principles, we explore relationships, human behavior, emotional intelligence, and the lessons that help us navigate life more wisely. Because understanding people often begins with understanding ourselves. Now stay with me, because in the next part of this discussion, we're going to explore one of the biggest misunderstandings about love. A misunderstanding that causes countless people to mistake control for care and attachment for commitment. Once you see it, you may never look at relationships the same way again. One of the saddest things I've witnessed over the years is watching people mistake possession for love, not because they're bad people, not because they're intentionally controlling, but because fear has a way of disguising itself as affection. I remember speaking with a man who was convinced he was protecting his relationship. He checked in constantly. He wanted updates throughout the day. He needed to know where his partner was, who she was with, what she was doing. In his mind, that was love. That was commitment. That was caring. Then one day his partner said something that completely changed the conversation. She looked at him and asked, "Do you trust me?" He immediately answered, "Of course I do." Then she asked, "Then why do you need to monitor me?" The room became very quiet, because suddenly, what looked like love didn't feel like love anymore. It felt like fear. Fear of loss, fear of betrayal, fear of uncertainty. And fear has a remarkable ability to convince us that control is necessary. I've seen this happen in dating relationships. I've seen it in marriages. I've even seen it in relationships that appeared healthy from the outside. The pattern is surprisingly common. One person becomes anxious. The anxiety creates a need for reassurance. The reassurance provides temporary relief. Then the anxiety returns, and the cycle starts all over again. The problem is that reassurance and trust are not the same thing. Reassurance is borrowed confidence. Trust is built confidence. One must constantly be supplied. The other grows over time. Relationship researcher John Gottman spent decades studying couples, and one of the most fascinating discoveries from his work was that healthy relationships are built on trust accumulated through small moments, not dramatic speeches, not grand promises, small moments, repeated consistently. A kept promise, a difficult conversation handled well, a partner showing up when they said they would. Little things, repeated, over time. And those little things matter more than most people realize, because trust is rarely built in a single moment. It's built in thousands of moments. Something else I've noticed over the years is this: the strongest couples are not the couples who never experience uncertainty. They're the couples who learn how to handle uncertainty together. Think about that, because uncertainty is unavoidable. People get busy, messages get missed, schedules change, life happens. The question isn't whether uncertainty will appear. The question is, what happens when it does? Do we move toward trust? Or do we move toward control? Do we communicate? Or do we investigate? Do we seek understanding? Or do we assume the worst? According to surveys conducted over the years, trust consistently ranks among the most important factors in long-term relationship satisfaction. That probably doesn't surprise you, but what surprises many people is how quickly trust can be weakened when fear starts making decisions. I've heard people say things like, "If you really loved me, you'd prove it." And while that sounds reasonable on the surface, love was never designed to survive endless testing. At some point, every relationship requires trust. Not blind trust, not foolish trust, earned trust. And that's a very different thing. Let me ask you something. Have you ever found yourself looking for evidence that someone cared about you, while accidentally overlooking all the evidence that they already did? Maybe they were showing up, maybe they were trying, maybe they were consistent. But fear kept asking for more proof. If that sounds familiar, you're certainly not alone. Many of us have done exactly that. And if you're finding value in this conversation, take a moment to subscribe. Here at the Wisdom Principles, we explore relationships, human behavior, emotional intelligence, and the lessons that help us navigate life more wisely. Because sometimes the greatest relationship lessons don't come from finding the right person. They come from understanding ourselves. Now here's where this conversation becomes even more interesting. Because love isn't just about trust, it's also about freedom. And in the next part, we're going to explore why some relationships feel peaceful, while others feel exhausting. The answer has less to do with compatibility than most people think, and far more to do with something people rarely talk about. There is a question I often ask people when they tell me they have found the one. And no, it's not whether they're happy. It's not whether they're compatible. And it's certainly not whether they argue. The question is much simpler. Do you feel more free in this relationship, or less? That question usually catches people off guard, because most of us were taught that love is about finding someone, keeping someone, holding on to someone. But healthy love does something interesting. It creates security without taking away freedom. I remember speaking with a couple who had been married for more than 30 years. 30 years. In today's world, that's an achievement all by itself. Naturally, I asked them what their secret was. I expected to hear something profound. Maybe a lesson about communication, or commitment, or sacrifice. Instead, the husband smiled and said something surprisingly simple. He said, "We gave each other room to breathe." I remember laughing, because after 30 years together, that was his answer. Not romance, not compatibility, not luck, room to breathe. Then his wife added something I'll never forget. She said, "We never tried to own each other." Think about that. Because many relationships slowly become ownership arrangements disguised as partnerships, not intentionally, not maliciously. It happens gradually. One expectation at a time. One demand at a time. One insecurity at a time. Until eventually, people feel obligated instead of loved. And there's a huge difference between those two things. Love inspires. Obligation drains. Love invites. Control pressures. Love creates safety. Control creates tension. The problem is that many people don't notice the shift while it's happening. They think jealousy is proof of love. They think possessiveness is proof of commitment. They think constant monitoring is proof of caring. But over the years, I've noticed something different. The healthiest relationships often look surprisingly calm. There's trust. There's respect. There's independence. Neither person feels like they need permission to be themselves, and that's important, because love should not require you to abandon yourself. A relationship should add to your life, not replace it. One of my favorite observations comes from psychologist and author Carl Rogers. He believed that people grow best in environments where they feel accepted and understood, not controlled, not manipulated, understood. That idea applies to relationships as well. People flourish where they feel safe to be themselves. I've seen relationships where one person felt they had to constantly edit their personality, watch every word, hide their opinions, suppress their interests, avoid conflict at all costs. From the outside, everything looked peaceful, but internally, they felt exhausted, because peace is not the absence of disagreement. Peace is the presence of safety. Safety to speak, safety to disagree, safety to be honest, safety to be yourself. According to relationship studies conducted over the years, couples who maintain both emotional closeness and personal independence often report higher levels of long-term satisfaction. That makes sense when you think about it, because nobody wants to lose themselves in order to keep a relationship, at least not forever. Eventually, the real person wants to come back out. And when that happens, the relationship either adapts or struggles. Let me ask you something. Can the people you love be completely themselves around you? And perhaps an even harder question. Can you be completely yourself around them? Take a moment and think about that, because the answer reveals a lot. I've noticed that the strongest relationships are often built on a simple understanding. Neither person is responsible for completing the other. They're responsible for supporting each other. That's different, very different. One creates dependency. The other creates partnership. One creates pressure. The other creates growth. And growth matters more than most people realize, because people change. The person you are today isn't the person you were 5 years ago. Life changes us. Success changes us. Failure changes us. Experience changes us. The question isn't whether people will change. The question is whether two people can continue growing while staying connected. And that's where genuine love begins to separate itself from attachment. Attachment fears change. Love makes room for it. Attachment wants certainty. Love accepts uncertainty. Attachment says, don't change. Love says, let's grow together. And if you're finding value in this conversation, take a moment to subscribe. Here at the Wisdom Principles, we explore relationships, human behavior, emotional intelligence, and the lessons that help us navigate life more wisely. Because understanding others begins with understanding ourselves. Now stay with me. Because in the next part of this discussion, we're going to bring everything together and explore the question that may matter more than any other. What does genuine love actually look like when attachment, fear, and insecurity are no longer in control? And the answer may be simpler than you think. By now, you may have noticed something interesting. Throughout this conversation, we've spent a lot of time talking about what love is not. No, love is not possession. Love is not control. Love is not constant reassurance. Love is not fear disguised as commitment. But that leaves an important question. What does genuine love actually look like? Not in movies. Not in social media posts. Not in fairy tales. In real life, I've thought about that question for many years, and honestly, some of the best answers didn't come from books. They came from watching people, listening to their stories, observing relationships over time. I remember meeting a couple who had been together for nearly 40 years. Like most couples, they had experienced good seasons and difficult seasons. Financial struggles, health challenges, family problems. The kinds of things that test every relationship. One day I asked them what kept them together. The husband smiled, looked at his wife, then said something surprisingly simple. I never stopped trying to understand her, not impress her, not change her, not control her, understand her. Then his wife laughed and said, "That's good because I'm still trying to understand him too." Everyone laughed, but there was wisdom hidden in that moment, because many people enter relationships believing understanding happens at the beginning. The truth is, understanding is a lifelong process. People change, dreams change, priorities change, life changes, and healthy love remains curious enough to keep learning. That's one reason genuine love feels different from attachment. Attachment often says, "I know exactly who you should be." Love says, "Tell me who you're becoming." Think about that. Because those two approaches create very different futures. One creates pressure, the other creates growth. Relationship researcher John Gottman once observed that successful couples continue turning toward each other over time, not just during major moments, during ordinary moments. A comment, a question, a joke, a story about their day. Small opportunities for connection, repeated again and again. And perhaps that's why genuine love often looks less dramatic than people expect. It isn't always fireworks. It isn't always excitement. It isn't always intense emotion. Sometimes it's simply consistency. Showing up, listening, paying attention, keeping promises, choosing each other repeatedly, day after day, year after year. In a world obsessed with intensity, consistency can seem boring until you've experienced inconsistency. Then it becomes one of the most attractive qualities a person can possess. According to research on long-term relationships, emotional responsiveness is one of the strongest predictors of relationship satisfaction. In simple terms, people want to feel that someone is there, not perfectly, not constantly, but reliably. And reliability creates trust. Trust creates safety, and safety creates the environment where love can grow. Let me ask you something. When the people you care about are struggling, do they feel safe bringing their struggles to you? And when you're struggling, do you feel safe bringing those struggles to them? Because genuine love creates that kind of safety. Not perfection. Safety. A place where people can be honest. A place where they can be human. A place where they don't have to pretend. I've often noticed that attachment asks, "How can I keep this person?" Love asks, "How can I support this person?" Attachment focuses on ownership. Love focuses on stewardship. Attachment fears losing. Love values nurturing. And once you begin seeing that difference, relationships start making a lot more sense. Before we continue, if you found yourself reflecting on your own relationships during this conversation, consider subscribing. Here at the Wisdom Principles, we explore relationships, human behavior, emotional intelligence, and the lessons that help us navigate life more wisely, because some of life's greatest breakthroughs begin with a single moment of understanding. Now there is one final piece of this conversation we need to discuss, perhaps the most important piece of all, because understanding the difference between love and attachment is valuable. But understanding what to do with that knowledge may be even more important, and that's exactly where we're headed next. At the beginning of this conversation, we asked a simple question. What is the difference between love and attachment? At first, the answer may not have seemed obvious. After all, both can feel powerful, both can consume our thoughts, both can influence our decisions, and both can make us feel deeply connected to another person. But as we've explored together, they are not the same. Attachment says, I need you. Love says, I choose you. Attachment fears losing. Love focuses on growing. Attachment clings. Love connects. Attachment seeks certainty. Love develops trust. And perhaps the most important difference of all, attachment often asks, what can this person do for me? Love eventually learns to ask, how can I care for this person? That doesn't mean love is easy. Far from it. Love can be painful. Love can be vulnerable. Love can break your heart. Anyone who is truly loved knows that. But genuine love does something attachment cannot do. It allows freedom, freedom to grow, freedom to change, freedom to be fully human. I've often reflected on the many conversations I've had over the years. The couples who stayed together, the couples who separated, the people rebuilding their lives after heartbreak, and one lesson keeps appearing again and again. The strongest relationships are rarely built on intensity. They're built on intention, not dramatic feelings, daily choices, not perfect compatibility, consistent effort, not possession, partnership. I remember speaking with an elderly gentleman who had been married for more than 50 years. Naturally, I asked him what he had learned about love. His answer was surprisingly simple. He said, love becomes less about finding the right person and more about becoming the right person. I've never forgotten that, because so many people spend years searching for someone who will make them happy, while overlooking the importance of becoming someone capable of building a healthy relationship. Think about that, because relationships are not built by one person. They are built by two people showing up, two people learning, two people growing, two people choosing each other again and again, even when life becomes difficult. And life always becomes difficult at some point. No relationship escapes challenges. No marriage escapes difficult seasons. No couple escapes misunderstandings. The question is not whether difficulties will come. The question is how we respond when they do. Do we move closer or further apart? Do we seek understanding or simply seek to be right? Do we choose fear or do we choose trust? Those choices matter far more than most people realize. According to relationship research, emotional connection and trust consistently rank among the strongest predictors of long-term relationship satisfaction. Not wealth, not appearance, not status, connection, trust, understanding. And perhaps that's because those are the things human beings have always needed most. To feel seen, to feel valued, to feel understood. Before we end, I'd like to leave you with one final question. If the people you love were describing their relationship with you, would they describe it as a place of pressure or a place of peace? Take a moment and think about that, because the answer may reveal something important. Not only about your relationships, but about yourself. And if this conversation has encouraged you, challenged you, or helped you see something differently, consider subscribing. Here at the Wisdom Principles, we believe that personal growth begins with honest reflection, and some of life's greatest lessons come from understanding ourselves and the people around us. Thank you for spending this time with me. I truly appreciate it. And remember, maybe the goal was never to find someone you cannot live without. Maybe the goal was to find someone you can choose again and again. Not from fear, not from loneliness, not because you need them to complete you, but because you genuinely value who they are. Because in the end, The healthiest relationships are not built on possession. They are built on trust, not on dependency, but on choice. Daily choice, continual choice, the choice to care, the choice to understand, the choice to grow together, and that's a choice worth making. Because here at the Wisdom Principles, we believe that knowledge leads to understanding, and understanding leads to wisdom. Until next time, choose love with wisdom, hold people with care, not control, build relationships with trust, not fear, and remember, the healthiest love is not the love that traps you, it is the love that helps you grow.